6 people in my family, 8 life insurance policies, and I wasn't the beneficiary on a single one. My parents swore to me it was a foolproof plan, fake and accidental drowning and disappearance, and we could all walk away with $3 million to start over somewhere new. Last time I believed them. In the dead of night, I felt my own father's hands holding me under the water, holding me until my lungs felt like they were exploding. They didn't want me missing. They wanted me dead. When I opened my eyes again, I was back on the night it was all supposed to happen. This time, I was the one hiding in the reeds along the shore, watching my dad and my uncle in the black water, holding down a stand-in who was wearing my clothes. "Hold him. Don't let go. Another minute and he'll be done," my father hissed in the darkness, his face flushed with exertion. The figure in the water thrashed wildly, thinking it was just a rehearsal, trying to wave his hands to signal they were going too far. But 2 pairs of powerful hands held him down, silencing him until there was nothing left. 3 days later, my mother was clutching a photo of me at the wake, wailing for all the world to see, just waiting for the insurance check to clear. That's when a hand tapped her on the shoulder. I offered her a tissue. "Mom, you're crying so hard. Who exactly are you mourning for?" The moment my mother turned around, a scream ripped through the funeral home. The me, who had supposedly drowned, was standing right behind her, perfectly fine, which raised a question. Who was the person they had personally drowned and disfigured? 1. 2 a.m. The edge of the reservoir. The wind rustled through the cattails, making a dry, whispering sound. Kyle hunched his shoulders against the cold, a cigarette pinched between his fingers. The orange ember glowed and faded in the dark. He looked at me, his eyes filled with pure greed. "So, you sure about this, Kyle?" I kept my voice low, my palms slick with sweat. "You do this, you get $100 grand. Clean." Kyle took a final drag, then flicked the butt into the water where it sizzled out. "Your folks are really going to pay?" He asked, eyeing me sideways. "They need my death to get $3 million to disappear. If I don't play along, they get nothing," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "But it's risky, and I'm not as strong a swimmer as you. If this goes wrong, we're all screwed." Kyle grinned, showing off a row of yellow teeth. "You're just a coward, Leo. What's so hard? Flail around in the water a bit, then swim underwater to the other side and lay low." "I'm in." He thumped his chest. I laughed coldly to myself. Last time, that's what I thought too. I thought it was all an act, a show for the insurance company. My parents said we were drowning in debt, and if I could just pretend to be dead for a few years, the payout would save our family. I bought it completely, but waiting for me under the water wasn't a getaway boat. It was my father and my uncle, their hands clamping down on my head. They didn't want a disappearance. They wanted a body. Only a dead man guarantees a quick payout. Only a dead man can't ask for his cut. This time, I was giving this golden opportunity to my dear cousin. Kyle Miller was my Uncle Dan's son, and he'd made my life hell since we were kids. He stole my lunch money, ripped at my homework, and even framed me for stealing from his dad, which earned me a beating with a belt. Tonight, it was his turn. "For this to look real, you have to wear my clothes," I said, pulling off my black hoodie. "It's got a hood. It'll cover your face. From the shore, they won't be able to tell it's you. They'll just see the hoodie." Kyle grunted impatiently and threw his own jacket into the reeds. He pulled his phone out and handed it to me. "Hold this. Don't want it getting wet. It's brand new." I took the still warm phone and slid it into an inside pocket, a flicker of contempt in my eyes. "Don't worry, man. I got it." The hoodie was a little tight on him. He sucked in his gut. "You're a twig, Leo. Skinny as hell," he grumbled, pulling the hood over his head. "Kyle, remember," I said, carefully running him through the script. "As soon as you see the flashlights, get in the water. Thrash around like crazy, like you're really drowning. When they run down to save you, you dive deep and swim for the opposite bank." He waved me off. Yeah. I get it. Stop nagging. This is the easiest money I'll ever make. Now go hide before your parents see 2 of us." I nodded and slipped back into the dense wall of cattails. I didn't go far. I dropped to my stomach in the mud, pulled out my phone, and hit record. The screen's dim light illuminated the cold smirk on my face. In the distance, 2 flashlight beams cut through the darkness. It was my father, Frank Miller, and my uncle, Dan Miller. They were here, and they were here to kill. Kyle stood at the water's edge, his back to them, the hood shadowing his face as he stretched his arms. He thought this was a dress rehearsal for his big payday. He had no idea it was the final act of his life. 2. The footsteps grew closer. Frank and Dan didn't call out my name. They clicked off their flashlights, moving like predators through the gloom, using the faint moonlight to find their way. Right on cue, Kyle jumped into the reservoir with a loud splash. He slapped at the surface, making a huge commotion and gurgling out muffled cries. "Help! Help me!" He was a natural, even more convincing than I'd hoped. The two figures on the shore exchanged a look. There was no hesitation, no discussion. They charged into the water. The water erupted when Kyle saw them coming. He thought they were joining the act and started thrashing even more dramatically. Frank reached him first, grabbing a fistful of his hair. Kyle started to turn to say, "Dad, Uncle Frank, it's me," but a massive force slammed his head underwater. Gurgle, gurgle. A stream of bubbles rose to the surface. Kyle fought back hard. He was strong, and Frank was struggling to hold him down alone. "Done? Get over here." How the hell is he so strong all of a sudden? It's like he's a different person. Dan didn't say a word. He lunged forward and wrapped his arms around the kicking legs. He could feel how solid and muscular they were, but he brushed it off, thinking it was the final, desperate surge of a drowning man. "Hold him, Frank. Don't let go. Another minute and he'll be done." Frank gritted his teeth, the muscles in his face twitching, his eyes shot with blood. It was excitement, the pure, manic thrill of being moments away from $3 million. The body in the water writhed like a dying fish. Kyle's hands clawed blindly at the surface, his nails scratching deep gouges into Frank's arm. Frank cursed, then drove his knee hard into Kyle's back, using both hands to lock onto the back of his head and shove it deep into the mud below. The silt swirled, turning the water into a murky soup. From the reeds, I watched it all. My phone held steady, recording every last detail. Last time, I was the one under the water. The agony of my lungs tearing apart, the terror of cold weeds wrapping around my neck. I can still feel it. Back then, I thought they were just messing with me, right up until I heard my father's voice. "Don't blame me, son. The family needs the money. Just think of it as doing your part." Now, it was Kyle's turn to hear those words. Except his ears were full of mud and water, and he couldn't hear a thing. The struggling slowly subsided. The ripples on the surface calmed. Only a low, gurgling sound broke the silence now and then. Dan let go, wiping the water from his face. "Frank, he's not moving." Frank was panting, but he didn't release his grip. "Wait a little longer, just to be sure." They waited for 2 full minutes. Only then did Frank grab Kyle by the collar and drag him out of the water. Kyle's body was limp as he lay on the gravelly shore, the hood still covering most of his face. Dan fumbled for a cigarette, his hands shaking. "Frank, you really killed him." Frank spat on the ground. "He had to die for us to get the money. How else are they going to pay out $3 million? He crouched down to look at the body. Between the hood, the wet clothes, and the darkness, they didn't bother to get a good look at the face. In their minds, whether it was me or Kyle, we were just tools to be used for cash. As long as someone was wearing my clothes at this exact time and place, that person was Leo. "We need to make it look right," Frank said, his eyes glinting. He grabbed Kyle's hair and slammed his head against a sharp-edged rock on the shore. Thud, thud. He did it twice. Blood instantly darkened the stone and trickled into the reservoir. "There. Now it looks like he slipped, hit his head, and passed out before he drowned," Frank said, standing up and wiping his bloody hands on his pants. Dan stared at the mangled mess of hair and flesh, swallowing hard. "Jesus, Frank, you didn't have to be so rough." "Rough? You want to be broke for the rest of our lives." Frank kicked the body, rolling it back into the deeper water. "All right, let's go. We'll report him missing in the morning." The two of them cleaned up the scene, erased their footprints, and hurried away. The reeds fell silent again. I lowered my phone, watching the rings spread across the water surface. "Kyle, your life just bought your dad and your uncle a $3 million dream. Worth it." 3 early the next morning. The county sheriff's office echoed with gut-wrenching sobs. My mother, Sharon, was on the floor, slapping her thighs, tears and snot streaming down her face. "Officer, you have to help me find my son. He said he was going night fishing, and he never came home." His phone's going straight to voicemail. I can't find him anywhere. He's my only son. My father, Frank, stood beside her, his eyes red-rimmed as he dabbed at them with a handkerchief, the perfect image of a simple, heartbroken father who had lost his child. Such great actors. If I hadn't personally watched him smash Kyle's head against a rock, I might have actually believed him. The police opened a missing person case and sent a search and rescue team to the reservoir. The shoreline was cordoned off with yellow tape. A search boat crisscrossed the dark water. I stood in the crowd of onlookers a good distance away, wearing a baseball cap and a mask, watching the whole charade with cold indifference. My uncle, Dan, was squatting by the shore, chain-smoking and occasionally glancing out the water. He wasn't sad at all. He was just impatient. He was picturing his son, Kyle, living it up with the advance I'd given him at some cheap motel in the city. Yesterday, I'd used Kyle's phone to send Dan a text. Dad, the idiot gave me the cash. I'm going to go party in the city for a few days. I'll be back to split the big money when it comes through. Don't call me. Don't want to look suspicious. Dan had bought it. All he could think about now was the money. The search went on all day. They found nothing. That night, the doors to the Miller house were shut tight. In the living room, a bottle of cheap whiskey and grilled steaks sat on the table. There was no sadness in the air, only a barely suppressed, giddy excitement. I quietly hopped the back fence and peered through a gap in the blinds. Frank raised his glass, took a long swallow, and said, "The kid really thought we were sending him off to start a new life. Dumb as a box of rocks. He really thought we had that kind of money." Sharon was counting the insurance policies she'd hidden in a shoebox. "Good riddance," she spat. "Saves us the trouble of paying for a wedding and a house for him. With this money, we can go to Florida, buy a nice big house on the water." "Now, Sharon," we agreed, Dan said, stuffing a piece of steak into his mouth, grease dripping down his chin. "We split this 50-50. I did half the work. I was the one holding his legs." Frank shot him glare. 60-40. I was the mastermind. I'm taking the bigger risk. "No way." We agreed on 50-50. Dan slammed his fork down. "I even had Kyle lay low for this. If he knew we really killed your son, he'd raise all kinds of hell." "He won't raise hell if his mouth is full of cash," Sharon scoffed, putting the policies away. "Don't be so greedy, Dan. Kyle's going to want things, right? Once the money comes in, you buy him a new truck. What's he going to complain about then?" "Den chocolate." "That's true. That kid would sell his own mother for $1. With enough money, you wouldn't care about his cousin. He'd probably sell me out, too." Listening to them, my fingernails dug into the window frame. This was my family, my own flesh and blood. To them, I was nothing but a walking pile of cash. "Just you wait, Dan. Wait until you find out the person whose legs you held down, whose head your brother smashed open, was your own son. I hope you're still smiling then." The third day, the body finally surfaced. The reservoir water was cold, and the corpse was badly bloated. Combined with the 2 blows from Frank, the face was a mangled ruin of flesh and bone, completely unrecognizable. But he was wearing my black hoodie, and in his pants pocket was my ID. I put it there myself. The moment the body was pulled ashore, Sharon let out a blood-curdling scream. She scrambled forward and threw herself onto the swollen corpse, burying her face in the wet clothes. "My boy. Oh, my poor, poor boy. How could you leave me like this? How am I supposed to live?" Frank fell to his knees beside her, beating his chest. A deputy tried to step forward to examine the body and confirm the identity. But Sharon clung to the corpse like a rabid dog protecting its food. "Don't you touch my son. Nobody touches him. He's already gone. Are you going to torment him even more? Just let him rest in peace." As she wailed, she shot a subtle, desperate look at Frank. They were terrified. Terrified the police would look too closely and see the head wound wasn't from an accidental fall. Even more terrified, they'd realize this wasn't me at all. Frank got the message. He immediately stood up to block the medical examiner. "Officer, the clothes, the ID. It's all my son's. We're simple country folk. We believe in letting our dead rest. His face is already destroyed. Please, no autopsy. Let's give him a proper burial. Let him have some dignity." He was crying so hard that some of the neighbors watching started to tear up, too. Seeing how emotional the family was, and with the ID and clothing matching up, the sheriff preliminarily ruled out foul play. After all, the killers themselves were reporting the death, and they had staged the scene perfectly. Dan stood back from the scene, staring at the corpse's exposed hand. It was pale and waterlogged, the fingers short and thick. Done froenet. The hand looked familiar. Kyle's thumbnail had been crushed in a car door when he was a kid. The nail had grown back, split down the middle. He took a step forward, trying to get a better look. Quick as a flash, Frank grabbed a white sheet they had brought and threw it over the body, completely covering the hand. Done? Don't look. It's too gruesome. Frank yelled. Go call the funeral home. We need to bring your nephew home. Startled by the command, Dan flinched back. Oh, right. I'll make the call. He didn't think twice. How could he possibly imagine that lying under that sheet was the very son he was waiting on to come home and split the money? The body was taken away. Everything was going according to their script, except they had killed the wrong person. 4 black ribbons were hung on the front door of the Miller house. A wake was set up in the middle of the living room. An expensive-looking, refrigerated, open casket lay in the center of the room, humming quietly. The body was inside, dressed in a suit, its face covered with a yellow cloth. Sharon had insisted on it, claiming his face was too disfigured to be seen, but really, she was terrified of being exposed. They threw a huge funeral. They had catering for 3 straight days, and half the town showed up to eat and pay their respects. Frank and Sharon spared no expense, putting on a big show of grief to create as many witnesses as possible for the insurance claim. The bigger the spectacle, the more people could attest that Leo was dead, and the faster the company would pay out. The insurance agent came by, seeing the grief-stricken family, the body with the matching ID, and the accidental death certificate from the sheriff's office. He had no reason to be suspicious. Mr. Miller, please accept my condolences. The claim is already being processed. The funds should be transferred within a week, the agent said professionally. Hearing within a week, Frank almost let a smile slip. He had to dig his nails into his thigh to squeeze out a few more tears. What good is money? Can it bring my son back? A truly Oscar-worthy performance. The night before the burial, the last of the guests had gone home, leaving Frank, Sharon, and Dan sitting around a fire pit in the backyard. The only light came from the flickering flames, illuminating their greedy faces. He goes in the ground tomorrow morning. Once he's cremated, it's over, Frank said in a low voice. They can't prove a thing from ashes. Sharon tossed a pile of junk mail into the fire. I feel like I've cried myself dry this week. As soon as that money hits, I'm booking a spa day. Dan was frowning at his phone. He'd been trying to call Kyle all evening. What the hell is with that kid? Still has his phone off. Dun grumblet. Something this big happens, and he doesn't even come home? He doesn't want his money. Frank shifted uneasily, glancing back toward the house where the casket lay. He's probably just blowing off steam. You know how kids are. Give them a little cash, and they forget everything else. You can get a hold of him after we get the money. I guess, Dan said, putting his phone away and looking at the house. Poor Leo. Life dealt him a bad hand, but he shouldn't have gotten in the way of our payday. Enough of that, Frank snapped. After tonight, this is all over. Over? No, the show was just getting started. The next day, the day of the burial, a somber organ dirge played from a small speaker. The whole town seemed to be crowded into the yard, waiting for the procession to the cemetery. 8 pallbearers moved to lift the casket lid, preparing to transfer the body for the trip to the crematorium. Sharon was sobbing so hard she could barely stand, leaning heavily on 2 relatives. Now, Mommy doesn't want you to go. Please don't leave me. The more she cried, the more the crowd sympathized. That woman really loved her son. It's just heartbreaking. Frank clutched a framed photo of me and walked to the front, ready to lead the procession. Right at that moment, the front gate swung open. I walked in, wearing a backpack and sunglasses, casually taking a bite out of an apple. I looked like a tourist who had just wandered off the street. The sunlight streamed in behind me, casting a long shadow. I crunched into the apple, the sound sharp and clear against the mournful music. The people at the gate froze first, then the people in the yard. One by one, every head turned to stare at me. Sharon, in mid-wail, looked up and saw me standing at the back of the crowd. She thought her mind was playing tricks on her. She rubbed her eyes and looked again. I looked right back at her. I took off my sunglasses and gave her a bright, wide smile. Wow, what's going on? Looks like a party. Sharon's sob caught in her throat, turning into a strangled squawk. Gack. The entire yard fell silent. Even the pallbearers froze, hands hovering over the casket. I walked to the center of the living room, right up to my stunned, rigid father. Dad, this apple is pretty good. Want a bite? I gestured toward the open casket. So who died? What with the big show? Don't tell me. This is all for me. The framed photo in Frank's hands slipped, shattering on the ground. But it wasn't the signal for the procession to begin. It was the signal for the nightmare to start. A ghost! It's a ghost, someone screamed. The crowd erupted. The timid ones scrambled for the gate, while the braver ones just shrank back against the walls, trembling. Sharon pointed a shaking finger at me. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and she collapsed in a dead faint. The cigarette Dan was holding burned down to his fingers, but he didn't even feel it. His eyes were practically bulging out of their sockets. What? Were you? Are you real? Frank stammered, a dark patch instantly spreading across the front of his pants. I stepped forward and took his ice-cold hand, pressing it against my cheek. Feel that? I'm warm, Dud. My phone broke a few days ago, so I went into the city to get it fixed. Figured I'd hang out for a couple of days. How'd I come back to find out the whole town thinks I'm dead? My smile vanished, replaced by a gaze as cold as ice. I pointed at the open casket, my voice rising, carrying across the entire yard. If I'm alive, then who the hell is lying in that coffin? Frank snatched his hand back like he'd been electrocuted. He stared at me as if I were a demon clawed up from the depths of hell. He had personally held me underwater. He had personally smashed my skull against the rocks. How was I standing here? If that was true, then who had he killed? Fear, like a venomous snake, coiled around his heart, squeezing until he could barely breathe. No, it can't be, Frank muttered, his face the color of ash. I saw. I know I. You know you what? I pressed, taking another step closer. You know you watched me drown? Or you know you killed me with your own 2 hands? Frank's hands flew to his mouth, his eyes darting around wildly. The townsfolk were all whispering, pointing. What is going on? I thought Leo was dead. Then who's in the casket? What kind of sick game are the Millers playing? Just then, the sound of sirens grew louder, and 3 police cruisers screeched to a halt out front. 7 or 8 officers got out, led by the sheriff who had taken the initial report. I was the one who had called them, right before I walked into the yard. Who called in a possible homicide? The sheriff asked as he strode in, stopping short when he saw the scene. Me, standing there, alive and well. The sheriff looked at me, then at the funeral portrait, his brow furrowing. What in the world is going on here? Isn't the deceased Leo Miller? I stepped forward, putting on an innocent face. Sheriff, I'm Leo Miller. I'm Euphina. My parents are telling everyone I'm dead, and they even got a body to try and pull off some insurance scam. I think this body might be someone they killed to take my place. Lies. You're lying. Frank screamed hysterically, trying to lunge at me and clamp a hand over my mouth. It was an accident. We just found the body. We didn't kill anyone. He just confessed without even realizing it. 2 deputies immediately grabbed Frank and subdued him. Open the casket. Examine the body, the sheriff ordered. No, you can't. Sharon, who had just come to, found a sudden burst of strength. She scrambled across the floor and threw herself over the casket. You can't open it. It's disrespectful. It'll bring a curse on us. She wasn't afraid of curse. She was afraid of the truth. 2 officers forcibly pulled her away. Sharon thrashed and kicked on the floor, her fingernails clawing at the wood planks. The medical examiner stepped forward, pulled on a pair of gloves, and yanked the yellow cloth off the corpse's face. The stench of decay filled the air. The face was indeed unrecognizable, but under the bright lights of a forensics lamp, an officer used a damp cloth to wipe away the blood and mud. The features were distorted, but some things couldn't be erased. A small dark mole behind the ear, and a certain familiarity in the underlying shape of the face. Dan stood nearby, shaking from head to toe. The more he looked at the face, the more his stomach churned. It looked so familiar. That sense of familiarity made him want to vomit. Done. Don't look. Frank yelled desperately from the floor where the deputies held him. But that only made Dan more certain. He shoved the medical examiner aside and grabbed the corpse's left hand. It was white and swollen from the water, but the thumbnail was split right down the middle. It had happened years ago when Dan, drunk, had slammed a door on it. In that single instant, Dan Miller's world fell apart. His mouth hung open, a choked, rattling sound escaping his throat as if he were being strangled. Kyle. He whispered the name. There was no answer. Only the body in the casket, silent. Where are my clothes? That's Kyle. Dan let out a scream so inhuman, so full of agony. It sounded like a dying animal. That's my son. The crowd gasped. The townsfolk backed away in horror. What? The dead one is Kyle. But Dan was there the whole time. He didn't even recognize his own son. My God, this family is insane. Dan was clutching the body, his face a mess of tears and snot. Suddenly, he whipped his head around, his eyes blazing red as he stared at Frank on the floor. Frank, you lied to me. Dan grabbed a thick wooden leg from a nearby offering table and charged at Frank like a rabid animal. The deputies tried to stop him, but Dan was fueled by a madness that gave him unbelievable strength. You told me it was Leo. You said it was that worthless little punk. You told me to hold his legs. You made me hold my own son's legs. I killed my own son. Frank, I'm going to kill you. Crack. The wooden leg connected with Frank's head. Blood sprayed through the air. Frank screamed and curled into a ball, trying to protect himself. Done? I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it was Kyle. Frank shrieked as he scrambled away. He was wearing Leo's clothes. How was I supposed to know it was your son? Bullshit. You told me to do it. It was you. Dan jumped on top of Frank, grabbing a sharp piece from the shattered picture frame, and drove it into Frank's face. Act! Frank clutched his head, half his ear torn away, blood pouring down his neck. The scene descended into total chaos. It took 4 officers to finally drag the berserk Dan off his brother. Dan was still kicking and screaming, flecks of bloody spittle flying from his mouth. I'll kill you. I'll kill all of you. That was my Kyle. He was my only son. At that moment, the reality of the situation finally hit Sharon. She looked at the body in the casket, then at her bleeding husband. She didn't move to help him. Her first instinct was to save herself. She pointed a trembling finger at Frank and shrieked at the police. Officers! It was all him. It was his idea. He wanted to fake the insurance. He wanted to kill Leo. I'm just cooking clean. I don't know anything. He made me do it. Frank, clutching his mangled ear, looked at the woman he'd been married to for decades in disbelief. Sharon, you bitch. You'd sell me out. All pretense was gone. Frank was a cornered animal. You're the one who stole the ID to buy the policies. You're the one who came up with the idea to kill him. You said Leo was a waste of space and we'd be better off with the money for a new house. You were the one who crushed up sleeping pills that night. We didn't end up using them, but you were ready to kill him. Frank lunged, grabbing a handful of Sharon's hair and slamming her head against the floor. You want to pin this on me? No chance. We go down together. Let go of me. You murderer. You even killed your own nephew. Sharon shrieked, clawing at Frank's face. Like you're any better. You were ready to kill your own son. The 3 of them, right there in the living room, in front of the police and the entire town, tearing at each other, screaming out their secrets, blaming one another, like 3 rabid dogs. Funeral programs fluttered through the air, wreaths were trampled underfoot. I stood to the side, watching it all unfold, watching them bleed, watching them turn on each other. And for the first time in a long, long time, the knot of rage in my chest began to loosen. That's enough. Cuff them. Take them all away. The sheriff's voice boomed through the room. More officers swarmed in, and the 3 brawling family members were finally restrained, their ugly fight ending with the cold, final click of handcuffs. 7. The interrogation room. The light was a harsh, sterile white. I sat behind the one-way glass, watching them break. I had the video. It clearly showed Frank and Dan forcing Kyle underwater, showed Frank brutally smashing the body's face with a rock. Combined with my testimony, the case was airtight. But the real show was watching them turn on each other, to get a better deal, to shave a few years off a sentence, to live one more day. They lost their minds. The prisoner's dilemma, playing out in real time. Interrogation room 1, Dan. His face was stained with tears. He was a broken man. I'll talk, officer. I'll tell you everything. I was tricked. Frank told me it was Leo. He said Leo was in on it, that we just had to knock him out for a bit. I didn't know he was really going to kill him, and I swear on my life, I didn't know it was Kyle. The detective stared at him coldly. In the video, you seem pretty eager to hold his legs down, and just a little while ago, you were screaming about killing your own son. That sounds like you knew it was murder. Dan's expression shifted from pathetic to monstrous. It was frank. That man is pure evil. Officer, it's not just this. I know other things he's done. 10 years ago, Old Man Hemlock's prize sheep went missing. Frank stole them and sold them to pay off a gambling debt. And that brush fire that almost took out half the county, he started it to clear some land, and it got out of control. He did it. And my father, his own dad, back when the state was buying up land for the new highway, he broke my dad's leg with a tire iron one night to get a bigger disability payout from the settlement. He told everyone the old man fell. That bastard would hurt his own father for money. Of course, he'd kill someone. Interrogation room 2. Frank. When the detectives told him what Dan was saying, Frank slammed his fists on the metal table. That son of a bitch. He's trying to pin it all on me, so he can get off easy. Don't listen to him, officer. He's no saint. That time with Dad's leg, we did it together. He was the one who held him down. And this whole murder thing, he brought it up first. He was the one saying, let's get this over with. The sooner he's dead, the sooner we get paid. It's on the video. You can hear it. In fact, I think he knew it was Kyle all along. Dan was the one who told Kyle to wear my son's clothes. He wanted to use me to kill his own son. Then he could have the insurance money all to himself and blackmail me for the rest of my life. Yes, that has to be it. He set me up. It was a depraved, illogical accusation, but it was designed to poison the well. Interrogation room 3. Sharon. She was still trying to play the part of the innocent, helpless housewife. Officer, I really don't know anything. I'm just a simple woman. That act lasted until the detectives played the audio from Frank and Dan's interviews, where both men threw her under the bus, claiming the entire scheme was her idea. Sharon's last defense crumbled. She slumped in her chair, a dark stain spreading on her pants. I want to see my son. I need to see Leo. Leo always listens to me. I'm his mother. He'll help me. The detective laughed, a short, sharp, humorless sound. Your son is the one who provided the video that put you in that chair. Sharon stared blankly. Then she started to howl, a desperate, pathetic sound that echoed in the small room. Who was I doing it for? I did it for my family. For this family. Wah. For the family? No, you did it for yourself. The trial was quick. The evidence was overwhelming, and the defendants had already provided a complete, if contradictory, picture of the crime by trying to blame each other. The day the verdict came down, I was in the courtroom. I sat in the gallery and watched the three of them at the defendant's table. In just a few short months, they had aged 20 years. Frank's hair was completely white, his back hunched. Dan's eyes were vacant. He kept muttering Kyle's name under his breath. Sharon was a wreck, laughing one minute and sobbing the next. The gavel fell. The judge read the sentences. The defendant, Frank Miller, guilty of first-degree murder, insurance fraud, and aggravated assault. For these crimes, he was sentenced to death. The defendant, Dan Miller, guilty of first-degree murder and insurance fraud. In light of the extreme psychological distress and the fact that he was manipulated into killing his own son, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The defendant, Sharon Miller, guilty as a conspirator to commit murder and insurance fraud. She was sentenced to life in prison. Hearing the word death, Frank collapsed, soiling himself on the courtroom floor. He twisted his head around, his eyes locking onto me. There was no remorse in his gaze. Only pure, undiluted hatred. Now, you animal, you killed your own father. You'll rot in hell for this, he screamed. I stood up and straightened my jacket. I looked right at him and mouthed two words, "Love you, Dad." As the bailiffs dragged him away like a sack of garbage, I felt nothing. When they led Dan past me, he suddenly stopped. His cloudy eyes met mine. Now, did Kyle? Was he in pain? I looked at him and said softly, "Uncle Dan." He struggled for 3 minutes underwater. His head was smashed against a rock twice. What do you think? A strangled cry escaped Dan's lips. He coughed, spraying a mist of blood, and passed out cold. Epilogue: Frank Miller was executed by lethal injection one morning. They said that right up until the end. He was cursing Dan for being an idiot and me for being an ungrateful bastard. Dan didn't last long in prison. He got into a fight over a piece of bread, and the beating he took aggravated an old injury. That, combined with his complete mental breakdown, led him to sharpen the handle of a toothbrush and shove it into his own neck one rainy night. An inmate said that in his final moments, he was flailing his arms like he was trying to swim, screaming, "Dad, help me." As for Sharon, she's serving her time at the state's women's prison. And it's a full-time job. In a place that has its own twisted code of honor, a woman who tried to murder her own son for money and got her nephew killed instead is at the absolute bottom of the social ladder. She faces daily ridicule and abuse from the other inmates. On visiting days, other prisoners have family. No one ever comes to see her. She will live out the rest of her days in a haze of loneliness, regret, and torment. And me? I sold the old house. I took the tens of thousands in cash they had stashed in the walls, the dirty money they'd scraped together by cheating relatives and taking out loans they never meant to repay. I donated half of it to a children's home. With the other half, I left that town and never looked back. Before I left, I went to the reservoir one last time. The cattails were still thick. The wind still whispered through them. I tossed Kyle's old, torn hoodie into a rusted barrel and lit a match. "The money's on its way, Kyle," I said to the flames. "Next time, don't be so greedy." The firelight danced on my face. I turned around and walked away. The sun was bright. My life was just beginning.